Okay, good morning and welcome to our Danube Water Forum session 1. Seems it's a little bit difficult to get up in the morning when we have a hot summer day outside, but it's a special day for all of us today. So let me say happy Danube Day, International Danube Day for all of you. I thought we are celebrating this starting at 6 o'clock and having some celebration. Seems even 9 o'clock is a tough time to get this celebration going, but this was also our intention to have our Danube Water Forum here in Tirana around Danube Day, and happy to have all of you here. We have quite some interesting discussions and presentations ahead of us. We will have one contribution online, and the setting the scene is what I was told from Kati Schilling, really one of our important first sessions to get the whole discussion, which we're supposed to have over the whole day today going. The energy market and effects on utilities in the Danube region seems to be a very clear issue. So, more or less what's happening at the moment, what is the situation, and we invited then for the panel various institutions representing the water sector, and it will be interesting which kind of role each of them can play in reacting or providing solutions, having being involved in the thought process. So far the introduction. We will start with two presentations, and Mrs. Katharina Gassner is available for us online and will do her presentation right from the screen. So we will provide now the change to her display. She's on the screen. Welcome, Katharina Gassner, and we hear from you energy price shocks in the Danube region. Very interesting topic. The floor is yours, or the screen is yours.
Thank you so much for this introduction, and good morning to all of you. It's an honor to have been invited as an energy expert to your esteemed water gathering. I will, exactly as has been mentioned, set the scene. I say it again, I'm coming at it from the energy side, but there are clear linkages to the issues that occupy the discussions in the water sector. The energy crisis is indeed affecting all different parts of the economy. So I will share my screen, and I would welcome if somebody can give me a sign that it is working as it should.
Yes, we see your presentation.
Thank you. I am trying to get into. There we go. Are we on the? Yes, I can actually see a reflection. Very good. So what I would like to start with is an image, or rather three figures that you see on this slide, which illustrate what all of us know, which is that energy prices have skyrocketed in the past 6 months. And this not only in our region, in the Danube region, but across the world. However, what you see here are prices that are referencing our specific geographic locations. So natural gas prices, which we illustrate here with the Dutch wholesale prices, have increased nearly fourfold. The level in 2020 was at a historic low during the pandemic, and the increase is significant, or could have been expected from the historic low, but the amplitude of the increase is indeed something that nobody foresaw. it is worth reminding everyone that the increase in energy prices has started already before the Ukraine war. We saw this increase due to the fast recovery from the pandemic and supply chain interruptions across the globe. So natural gas prices, as measured here by the Dutch wholesale price, have increased nearly fourfold because of the coupling between natural gas and electricity markets in Europe, where the marginal unit of electricity is priced according to gas generation. We see a very similar increase in the wholesale prices for electricity. We show you here the Hungarian power exchange price evolution. So here as well, you see from a historic low, you see a 3.5-fold increase in the prices. And finally, crude oil, which is something which affects every sector, in particular also transport, logistics, but regular functioning of industry and agriculture has also seen significant increases. If we look ahead, there is some relief on the horizon. The prices are expected to moderate somewhat in 2023, as shown here by the forward prices that we have on the markets. However, the level will not go back to what we have had as a long-term average. What we are showing here in the yellow striated line on the graphs are the 5-year averages for natural gas and crude oil, respectively. And you can see that we will remain well above those 5-year averages into 2023. 24 is harder to predict, but at least for the heating season, which determines energy prices to a great degree across the region, at least for the coming heating season, we will have a similar tight and expensive supply situation as we have experienced in the winter that we have just passed. At the World Bank, we have done an extensive analysis of the vulnerability of countries to the energy shocks that we are experiencing. And what you see on this slide is a summary of this vulnerability analysis for the 6 Western Balkan countries. I do realize that we have in this room representatives from more countries, but I'm illustrating the analysis with the 6 Western Balkan countries. There are 3 features I would like to point out on this slide. First, on the left-hand side, you see the energy supply for each of the countries by energy source. And what I would like to highlight with this chart are that the Western Balkan countries have a very low vulnerability to the natural gas shock, which is the shock that is probably most talked about across Europe at the moment. But it is really only 2 countries, North Macedonia and Serbia, who have any gas share in their total energy supply that is noteworthy. North Macedonia, you can see that 9% of total energy supply is natural gas. In Serbia, it is 13% of natural gas. But even those numbers are much smaller than what we have in other countries, such as Germany or Italy. There are countries in the region, such as Kosovo and Montenegro, who have no natural gas whatsoever in their energy mix. For the other countries, the shares are very small, 2%, Albania, 3% in Bosnia. So the conclusion is that the vulnerability to natural gas is actually low if you look at the figures. The second point I would like to draw your attention to are net electricity imports. So this is a direct link to the vulnerability countries have for the imported electricity, which is imported from the wholesale market. You will remember the graph I've just showed you at the beginning of the skyrocketing wholesale electricity market prices, countries that have to import source from various sources. However, the wholesale markets have played a role because they usually provide short-term electricity that has not necessarily been anticipated. So what you see on that middle column is that here as well, we actually have fairly low vulnerability in the Western Balkans to imports of high-priced electricity. Albania is the most exposed country. It has a systemic need for imports. 32% of its consumption over a year is imported. And North Macedonia shows the second highest exposure. 24% of all its electricity on average is imported. So these countries have experienced particularly difficult situations in the past few months because the import costs have been multiples of what has been the norm in the past, and the fiscal cost has been very heavy. I would like to point out one more feature here, which is that regardless of annual averages, some countries have also had a need to import electricity over the past winter and have incurred very high cost for this. This is the case in Kosovo. Kosovo, as you can see, has actually zero net imports over a year, but it has a very high seasonal demand for electricity. Up to 15% of electricity in the winter is imported. And over the past winter, we have seen 20 million alone in electricity imports in December. So this has accumulated over the remaining winter months, and the current bill is much higher than usual. Serbia is in a similar position, not because of systematic seasonality of imports, but because it had unexpected outages of generation, which resulted in the need for imports at the worst possible time. So over December, January, Serbia, which usually is independent in terms of its energy generation, in its electricity generation, has also had an unexpected need for imports, which has amounted to several hundreds of millions of additional costs, which have been covered by the government to a large extent. The last point I would like to make on this slide is that all of the countries we're looking at here show very high energy intensity of industry, and that is probably a topic that we will come back to. So on average, their economies consume much higher shares of electricity per GDP unit of output. And we also see that households are vulnerable to price increases because they already have a very high share of their household expenditure that is attributed to energy. Very often we see that it's already 10% of household expenditures already goes to energy before the crisis. And if we see price increases, then this vulnerability is accentuated. So what does it mean, this price shock in terms of the different countries? The countries have been affected to different degrees. This is what we've just seen, but also different stakeholders in the industry and in the economy have been affected differently. And this is what this slide illustrates. We have here 3 different groups of affected stakeholders. The first are utilities and network operators themselves. The second group are households and small commercial consumers. And the third group you see here are industrial consumers. We have separated these different groups because the impact of the crisis has been very different for the different groups. Let's take the first one, utilities and network operators. This is mainly focused on energy utilities, so gas and electricity utilities, but I know that for the water utilities, there will be additional discussion. And I don't think that the picture is actually that different, despite the fact that we, in our analysis here, have not looked at the water sector specifically. What we have seen is that electricity suppliers and transmission and distribution system operators in countries that had to import electricity over the last 6 months have incurred huge losses and liquidity issues due to the steeply rising supply costs and often an inability to pass these extra costs on to end consumers. Final prices, and we'll go into this somewhat more, have actually not increased at all to the same extent that the upstream costs, the supply costs have increased. So on the electricity side, we see very dire financial situations for electricity utilities that have literally fallen off a financial cliff with many hundreds of millions of euros of unexpected costs. On the natural gas side, we have obviously less exposure because there is simply less gas across the region, but there as well, we have importing countries such as Serbia that has faced higher import bills, despite of the fact that there are long-term bilateral contracts in place. Still, some of the gas had to be sourced on wholesale markets, and therefore much higher costs were incurred. And importantly as well, district heating companies that source gas for heating purposes have been hit by much higher costs, and they as well have had only limited ability to pass these higher costs on to their end consumers. In the category of households and small commercial consumers, what we see is actually very little impact so far. All the governments across the region have immediately put in place protective measures which have shielded this consumer group from the significant price increases. Regulated prices have risen either not at all or only to a very small extent in the past 6 months. So governments have not allowed the much higher upstream costs to be passed on to households and small commercial consumers. And that means that most of the extra costs have so far been absorbed by governments themselves. So the utilities bear the brunt, and then there are direct transfers from governments to the utilities to compensate for the fact that end user prices have not increased. So the story is the same on the electricity side or the natural gas side. Now that leaves the industrial consumers, and that's where we see the most severe impact of the rising energy prices. These are unregulated markets. Many industrial consumers have direct bilateral contracts for electricity or for gas, and they have been fully hit by the increase in energy prices. They have the option to pass at least some of these high upstream costs onto their own consumers, and this is what has happened. And this is a major contributor to the overall rise in inflation that we observe in the region and globally. So industrial consumers, and I believe that many of you will have concerns that are linked to this type of consumer, have been hit very hard. Very briefly, on this slide, we summarize the different measures that governments have taken to mitigate the impacts of the price hikes. I've mentioned, I believe, some of them already, but let's systematically summarize them again. The first category of measures that governments have taken amount to financial support to the energy sector. So that is direct budget transfers to compensate for the liquidity, for the much higher liquidity needs due to import bills, for example. And there are liquidity and guarantees that are offered also in part to raise commercial finance, which then is guaranteed by the governments. The second almost universal measure that governments have adopted is a lowering or a suspension of taxes and excise duties on energy products. We see that the excise duties, for example, on petrol has been reduced by up to 50% in some countries, therefore alleviating some of the price rises. I say it again, in particular, the petrol sector here is affected in order to alleviate some of these costs which consumers face. Where there are regulated prices, caps have been imposed. I've mentioned this on the earlier slide already. In particular, households and small commercial users have seen only very limited cost pass-through. So caps have been imposed on energy prices. And in some cases, Serbia, for example, for large gas users, there is also a cap on industrial users. So they might not be regulated, but the utilities simply were instructed not to pass the costs on. We also see an expansion of social assistance programs, for example, extra allocations for pensioners and other vulnerable household groups. And we see subsidized credit lines, liquidity loans offered to industry. So that amounts to similar measures of protection that utilities have also received. Large industry, in particular in cases where we're still dealing with state-owned enterprises, have also been shielded through government credits and guarantees. Finally, we've also seen a third category of measures, and that was squarely aimed at energy conservation. It essentially amounts to, if less energy is used, of course, the bill will rise less steeply. I believe this is the last slide, and I will focus only on the right-hand side. What you're seeing here are recommendations that also mirror what the European Commission has issued for its own response to the crisis. You might be aware that there are different documents and communications that the European Commission has issued in the past few months. Perhaps the most recent and hefty is the Repower EU, which summarizes all the different recommendations to governments of how to address the current crisis. They're short-term measures, and they very much go back to what I've just gone through. But then there are also long-term measures. If you remember, I told you at the beginning of the presentation that we don't see a going back to the level of prices as they were before 2021. And therefore, there are really long-term implications for what we are going through at the moment, meaning that it's not just short-term protection, but it's really long-term structural change that is indicated. What we see on the energy side is clearly increased turning away from fossil fuels, so a rapid scale up of renewables, which are less dependent on the global vulnerabilities of markets. What we also see is an increased effort to foster international markets and integrate across the region. There are still large untapped synergies in terms of exchange and trade of electricity that could lower the costs for everyone. We see an interest in new technologies, in particular hydrogen, which has been advocated for before the crisis, but which now is sort of like rising to even higher importance. So do we actually have alternatives, in particular to the natural gas that is causing so much of a headache in Europe at the moment? And finally, what we also see is a clear need again to address the financial stability of utilities. We've had a number of years where utilities across the region have actually done quite well in terms of cost recovery and efficiency improvements. This now is proving far from enough. And we are looking again at financial restructuring and other measures. With this, I would like to conclude this introductory session, and I will hand over to the chair. Thank you so much. I will stop sharing.
Katharina, I hope you hear the applause, well received, and thanks for this introductory presentation, which I think was very clear and even pragmatic. It was just showing what the situation is about and really sets the scene for our discussion for today. We do have a second presentation by Radoslav Rusev, and I just call you, Radoslav, to continue.
Okay. Thank you, Walter. I think it's I'll try to step on some of the concepts that Katharina Gassner introduced, particularly the ones for vulnerability and intensity, which are extremely relevant for the water sector. And I will try in a not so long presentation to walk you through some of the implications of the rising electricity costs on the water sector. It's perfectly clear that when we talk about energy in the water, it's not only electricity, it's also fuel, gas, etc. But let us focus on electricity because this is the big thing. I'll try to skip some of the slides and I'll try to talk a bit faster, being mindful of the time. So first I have a couple of slides that will try to elaborate the context and talk about how much energy, how much electricity we are actually using in the water sector. Not so much on the energy price dynamics, that was very nicely covered in the previous presentation, but I will try to elaborate on what are the different policy, regulatory, and other implications. And then I'll try to introduce probably slightly provocative thought that actually there is a weird and cynical paradox in our sector. And I'll try to make some suggestions, many of which will be elaborated on in the coming sessions. So, the context. Without getting into each single bullet, together with my colleague Victoria Iskova, who is not with us today, we try to summarize some data, at least for a couple of countries in the Danube region, Bulgaria, Albania, Kosovo, and Ukraine. The figures, although there are country-specific differences, of course, show a couple of similarities. Round about 20 to 25% is the actual portion of the electricity costs in the total OPEX, operational costs of a water utility in the region. And we have relatively high, not relatively high, quite high level of losses. No matter what kind of indicators we use, whether it's the percentage non-revenue water or the losses per length of mains, it's always quite high. And although the figures we used are for 2020, we can see some substantially high levels of the prices and the energy intensity in kilowatt hours per cubic meter. So my home country, Bulgaria, more than 600 gigawatt hours, which is roughly 2% of the total electricity consumption in the country goes in the water sector. From what I have seen, this level is quite similar in other countries. What we don't have on these slides, but it's a very useful information, is that all across the region, there is heavy concentration in a small number of utilities, like 4 or 5 utilities typically account for like 50% of the overall sector consumption. So Bulgaria, 20% of the cost in the water utilities goes for electricity. Non-revenue water, typically above 60%, unfortunately. Albania, 200 gigawatt hours, total sector consumption. Level of losses very similar to Bulgaria. I think the one defining feature of Albania is that extremely high concentration in 3 utilities, which probably makes it a bit easier to prioritize energy efficiency. Kosovo, slightly lower level of non-revenue water and slightly lower level of the percentage of operating costs that go for energy. I hope these figures are correct. And Ukraine, big country, big energy usage. I mean, there are some, when we analyze this in detail, there were some monster users in Ukraine, like the big Donbas system of open channels, which is like a system of cascades and rivers constructed 100 years ago to supply the big steel manufacturers. I substantially doubt the figure for non-revenue water in Ukraine, but again, the bottom line is that energy costs are 20-25% of total electricity costs. A very quick and simple calculation, when we say that before the crisis we had 20% of the costs go for energy, it doesn't mean that when we have doubling the costs, we have doubling the proportion. First, because if you have 20 units and that goes to 40, the overall units in the denominator is also increased. And second, the other 80 also goes up a bit, at least with the inflation. So if we have like 20% before the doubling of the prices, after the doubling is not 40, it's 30, but it's still big enough. And almost everywhere in the region, electricity is the second biggest cost component after labor, of course, but we have quite a few utilities in which it is the first, and in quite a few of them, it's more than 50% already. So, and this is combined with a very high level of non-revenue water. Moving forward, I don't want to waste too much time on that, but as Katerina outlined before me, extreme dynamics in the price of electricity. Typically in this region, we have 2 types of markets, regulated and non-regulated. My country is an example of a non-regulated market. We moved to the free energy markets. The majority of the utilities are extremely against the free market, ironically. Instead of reaping the benefits of being able to manage your energy well and buy the electricity on the free market, the prices exploded. You can see a comparison between the prices last year. This is only the energy component, something like 0.4 to 0.6 euro cent per kilowatt hour. The graph below is, I took that about 10 days ago when I was putting down my presentation, 4 times bigger, more than 20 euro cents per kilowatt hour. In Albania, you guys had a very recent, earlier this year, substantial electricity increase, which I understand is a huge shock to many of the water utilities. So long story short, high energy intensity, high vulnerability, recent huge increases. How are the energy companies being the water utilities being supported, different types of measures in different countries. In some cases, they are directly subsidized for the differences. For example, in my country, every quarter or every month, I'm not so sure, they are making a protocol and they are telling, if you get no increase in the price of water, and last year you paid that many kilowatt hours and that was your end bill, the difference, you get a subsidy. In some countries, there are smaller subsidies at the level of the cost, not specifically for electricity. In some cases, there are tariffs that are kept artificially low, and almost all around the region, the electricity distribution companies are told or ordered not to disconnect water utilities in this difficult situation. At the level of the utilities, the one unquestionable measures, particularly in sunny places like Albania, is on-site generation. It's not a panacea, but it's working. And clearly this means that we have the scope and the urgency to implement large energy efficiency programs. Moving forward, I believe many of you will agree, although there are notable exceptions, there is a certain paradox. I deliberately want to keep the next two slides anonymous, although many of you will figure out which are the companies. I've taken two companies in the region which are extremely high energy consumers. These companies have been studied extensively, and these are industrial scale pumping systems with megawatts of installed capacity. In this case, this is a pumping station with more than 5 megawatts of installed capacity, huge transmission system, and more than 80% of the water that is produced there is being lost. Huge pressure, huge flow, more than 30 bars, and obviously huge potential. Another water utility, which I'll then use to illustrate my point in a bit more detail, similar system in a similar country. Typically, the energy intensive situations occur at the water supply level, not at wastewater treatment level, in places where you repump water a number of times, and these two companies are identical. So extremely high intensity. I mean, I strongly suggest that we stick to that indicator when we talk about energy efficiency potential, the number of kilowatt hours used to produce a cubic meter of water. These are levels that are comparable to this, not comparable, they are higher than desalination. So what I'm trying to say is that, ironically, we have a lot of examples, again, not everywhere, but places where the most energy intensive water utilities have the highest level of non-revenue water. Why is that? Because poor water utilities typically live in an environment of institutional instability. The water managers are frequently sacked, even prosecuted. High OPEX for energy typically means low OPEX for salaries. And sometimes there are even technical, technological, and hydraulics explanations. You have high losses, you put another pump, it doesn't help much, except for the energy increase, and it becomes a huge mess. Again, this is not necessarily the norm, but very, very often in our region, high energy intensity is combined with high level of non-revenue water, ironically. Going forward, I think it's perfectly clear to all of us that energy efficiency should follow water efficiency. It's ridiculous to invest in efficient pumps before you have at least slightly reduce the water losses, simple as that. But more importantly, and the point I really want to try to make is that energy efficiency is no longer pump replacement. It's much bigger. Load management, playing on the free market, on-site generation is becoming a big game. I'll try to illustrate that with the previous example. I mean, this is a situation personally I know in very good level of detail because I happen to manage this company for a short period of time. If we take that supply system, I really don't want to get too much into details, but as you can see, that's a combination of 4 pumping stations that pump and repump the water to a reservoir, like 20,000 cubic meters reservoir that supplies a city of some 60, 70,000 people plus minus. So If we want to address energy efficiency, what I'm trying to preach out is that it's not only pump replacement, and there are a number of questions that we should at least ask ourselves before we undertake a project. Does the city really need that much water in the long term? What is happening with industrial consumption? What is happening with demography? Is there a potential to reduce non-revenue water? Question number one. Question number two, if we can supply the city from two places and one of them provides water at 1 kilowatt-hour per cubic meter, the other one is much more expensive, can we not pump a bit more with the less energy intensive source? Question number three, if this source is so energy intensive, can we stop it from time to time, or can we just keep it for the sake of supplying these villages across the transmission main? Question number four, the red lines, these are supply pipes from the main transmission mains where you have huge losses. Why don't we prioritize non-revenue water exactly there? We all know that it's much easier to reduce losses at transmission systems as compared to distribution systems. Question number five, after we have studied the previous options, why don't we then go to energy efficiency at the most conventional level, pump and motor optimization? Question number six, let's look on at least partially offsetting the electricity supply by generating something on site. And question number seven, if we have a huge reservoir and we can play with the loads and the balances, why don't we work with the energy trader and the electricity distribution company to really negotiate the best possible prices? All in all, what I'm trying to say is that if you look at all these questions at the same time, we are much more likely to figure out a proper energy package as opposed to a one-off pump replacement. A couple of words about the enablers. In the Danube region, we are extremely focused on getting the money and investing in capacity development, thinking that these two are the ultimate factor. Over some work that we have done in the energy efficiency program under the DLEAP, within a couple of World Bank projects, in some of which I have participated, we figured out that there are a number of additional problems. The motivation of people, both at expert and management level, clear enough, that's a cliche. The funding and guarantee mechanisms, there is money, but there is no specific mechanism to give it out. A very big problem here are the contractual mechanisms at a country level. Even if there are money at a regional level, each country has its own procurement regulations. The national procurement legislation actually is exactly what I wanted to say next. What I'm more specifically trying to say is that we have procurement legislation which is perfect for short-term construction contract, and we have some legislation for massive concession contracts. What we are looking for energy efficiency should ideally be something in between. And a big point I'd like to make is that there is very good expertise in the region for pump management, but it is a very much evolving game. We need people in the water utilities who are good in load balancing and energy trading as well, particularly for those countries that are moving towards liberalized energy markets. So if there is one word that if the key word in Katerina's presentation was vulnerability, I would like the key word in my presentation to be really complexity. I would like to finish with, or one more slide actually, but I would like to say that there is, in order to address this complexity, there is a huge variety of enablers that we as a sector need to work on at institutional levels. Municipalities, national institutions, and international ones have a different role to play. I sincerely believe that energy efficiency is one of the most interesting areas to work on. It combines the Internet of Things, SCADA systems. It combines new contractual models. It's nice, I believe. I wouldn't go into each and every bullet, being mindful of the time. Of course, the biggest game is to be played at utility level. One core message I want to convey here is that we very often look at utility level and summarize utility information. One recommendation would be to look at supply system level. Each utility has a couple of supply systems, and typically one of them that supplies the big regional city is big. And because this is an event organized by IWG and quite a few of its members are associations, I would like to stress out that the associations can play quite a role. Something like that we are working with Beta and with Shukalp. I'm trying to do something similar with Bulgaria, particularly in countries that are politically sensitive and governments change often, like in my country, like 4 governments over 18 months. Someone has to help bypass the political hassle and work on that systematically. Really last slides, without getting into details, in an attempt to finish on a positive note, although we are extremely vulnerable and the water sector is quite energy intensive, there are quite a few good examples. All of these in the regions, most of them represented by companies who are here with us today. We have in the region companies that are doing not only the conventional good practices, but going further down into digital twinning, exploring the balances and reaping the benefits of the free market. We have companies that are doing great job with on-site energy generation, for example, with Sofia and Korcha, actually. We are having companies that are actively using on-site methane capture and CHPs that are helping their utilities become partially or even fully energy independent. Thank you. I would like to also thank my colleague Victoria, who helped me massively with compiling some figures and examples. Apologies to the translators that I moved a bit fast, and thank you all for listening.
Well, thank you, Radoslav. And with no further delay, I would like to invite the panelists to join me here on the podium. So it's, Katarina Gassner will join us on the screen, but it's Radoslav who is here with me. Christian Minelli will come to join us from Varec. Nick Rimshani is invited to be on the panel. Elisabetta Pocci from Shukalp. Gazmet Daci is here with us, and Georgi Sugar representing a utility. Please, great to have you here. Okay, we are short in time, so we try to involve quite a massive panel into the discussion. Well, what I heard, and I think this has been 2 very interesting really presentations which set the scene. What was interesting when Katarina Gassner said that the government protection, the shielding of private households is an intention which is politically a high priority. Also, Radoslav said that there is government protection or support for the utilities going on. So this is something I witness that the immediate reaction is we try to protect people, we try to protect the society, but will this go on forever? We have various institutions here present on the panel, and Radoslav, you give me a keyword for this discussion: the role that from the enablers is a question here. Each of your institutions are playing a role in the water sector, reacting on this development of the energy markets. And my question to you is really, are you in the role of an enabler to react on this situation, or do you find yourself only in the situation of being a passenger on a train that is just happening? I would like to ask first those new people, representatives which are new on the panel, and then probably at the end of the first round to ask Katharina Gassner and Radoslav Rusev to probably also reply what you hear now from the enablers present here. So Christian Minelli, you are for me the first one coming up with this question: what is the specific role your institution can play or can take in reacting on a midterm perspective, not immediately, but on a midterm perspective, to influence or to react on developments which we had on display by the first two presentations? Christian?
Thank you, Walter. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me as a representative of WAREG, the Association of European Regulators. I'm also an official at the Italian Regulatory Authority for Energy Networks and Environment. And thank you for the good questions, because here the elephant in the room is how do we tackle energy prices in the short term rather than long-term strategies. And institutions are really crucial, like we heard from the previous presentation. One of those institutions are regulators. We heard about price regulation, and I just want to you know better than I do that here we're talking rather about economic regulation. So we're talking more about infrastructure. So the role that the regulators have on mitigating effects on capital expenditures and operational expenditure. And I'd like to make 2 points. The first is the measures, like you said, and the second is the kind of setup vision for the future as regulators. In terms of measures, regulators have a powerful leverage, which are tariffs that can generate, if wisely used, the correct mitigation signs for investments and efficiency in the sector. There are, I believe, short-term measures, emergency measures that have to be taken, and let's say long-term measures that can be taken from a regulatory perspective. In the short term, there are good examples around Europe on how to tackle these energy costs. I can pick few of them where all these energy costs were entirely absorbed in the tariffs, provided that they fall within a range, a minimum and a maximum range of electricity prices incurred by the companies. And this data and this type of measure is possible only when regulators have access to the data, to the correct data on energy costs. Italy is one example, for instance. So I give you this example because it can be applied and has been applied also in other countries. We discovered that in between 2022 and 2021 and 2022, the range, the average consumption range was between 125 and 165 euros per megawatt hour. And so we adopted this range as the range within which, if you fall inside that and you have costs inside that range, you would fully recover the costs. So through the tariffs, you would fully receive and cover the cost of the electricity prices. The problem is then, from what we heard from the World Bank, is that the prices are much higher than that. So the problem is that when you fall outside this range, how you recover those costs? And here again, regulators can play a role. There are tariff components that can be added on a case-by-case analysis. And there are also combination of tariff measures and governmental measures, which are different. We heard about price regulation, but price regulation is another story. We don't deal with with the market as regulators. So in a ways, what my point here, my second point, and here I go to the conclusion and the vision, is that when you have to address these kind of externalities, the role of institutions is fundamental, is crucial. You need strong institutions there and collaboration to generate short-term effects, but also for the future to generate win-win situations whereby the sector wins and also the regulators and the governments cooperate together to, to help the sector address this kind of measures.
Well, thank you. And well, I just pass on now to Mr. Shani, representing the regulators of Albania. What's the role of your institution here in Albania, or as a national regulator that can provide an active role in dealing with this energy situation?
Thank you, Walter. For sure, the regulator has to play an important role for mitigation of this very crucial situation in the sector imposed by the energy prices. We don't have to be spectators, this is for sure. Just in 2 words for the situation in water sector in Albania, the energy prices before this situation increase of the energy prices represents about 30% of the running cost, operation and maintenance costs. And with the new prices approved by the energy regulator in Albania, the energy prices for the waterworks utilities is raised about 64%. That means in the running cost, we have more than 20% cost more that the companies has to afford. And we make we anticipated a kind of study regarding, because this is heritage problematic issues in water sector in Albania, the energy possibility to pay the companies the energy bill. And in this case, we took about 6 companies which represented more than 63% of the energy bills in total for the sector. And we analyzed one by one what are the reasons, and in a certain way this has to be generalized as a problematic and conclusion for quite all the enterprises in utilities in the sector. What I want to say about the active role that they can play, our instruments in our hands as regulators are, first of all, justified costs, which we use. And the second one is also the affordability that we can play in order to, based on the data. And in the tariff, by analyzing the energy efficiency problems that the companies has to improve, and also the performance regulators, as Rado told, that strictly is linked non-revenue water with high energy consumption, and this is typical for the big enterprises in Albania. So, and regarding the efficiency, first of all, we have to have a requirement that they apply for the new tariffs. The utilities has to submit a report in energy efficiency, which is not strictly linked or limited just with energy pumps, efficiency of the pumps, but also in a wide range of other measures, as revision of the hydraulic schemes or hydraulic designs, and also other component which our colleagues mentioned in details before. And so to put objectives for key non-revenue water especially is very important. Also this requirement for this energy report. On the other hand, we have to comply and to evaluate the situation regarding the affordability. Based on those criteria, we set up the prices to mitigate the situation, and the rest has to be subsidized or to be completed by the government subsidies. But another factor that we have to consider is also to not apply the huge jumps of the prices. Nevertheless, that the affordability criteria is guaranteed, because this usually gives a negative impact from the customer for not paying at all the bill. So in 2 words, these are our arms, our instruments that we can use to mitigate this problematic situation in the future. For sure, this is based also in the strategic, let's say, decision that the central governments can take regarding the energy sector, which has to be part of this analysis. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Shani. And just going on in our round of panelists, I give the word to Elisabetta Pocci, representing Water Association. And Radoslav was also already pointing out on his slide the role and the important role of associations. So Elisabetta, do you see a role for the associations?
Thank you, Walter. I was also very pleased with Rados pointing out of our ongoing discussions over the last months, but not only, even before. Besides what Rado presented there and the current discussions we're having, yes, we do have a role to play in this topic, and it's related to the work that we do around fulfilling our mission as an organization. A big chunk of our work is dedicated to human resources, people who work, professionals who work in the sector. And around those issues, we have different programs of capacity development, training activities, peer-to-peer exchanges and such. One thing I would like to point out from our observations through this work and relationships with utilities is that for a business that has at least 1/3 of its costs going for energy, and as Rado pointed, even more than 50% sometimes, it is not to be found one person in charge for, dealing with energy issues within the utility. Normally that person would be called energy efficiency manager, something like that. But this person is missing for multiple reasons, but also one reason that we see, and it's overall, we see it also with other work we do with utilities. We have been talking about this for many conferences now. We see a lack of or a shortage of professionals in the sector. We pointed out different meetings yesterday, actually, even during the opening session, the need to attract young people and to capacitate them so that they fulfill the needs that the utilities have. But we also need to make sure that we retain those people once we get them in. Now, our sector is a very interesting sector to work at, but that's not enough for people to stay. So motivation with different means, starting with better paychecks, is something that we need to figure out. And this is just one part of that vicious circle that Rado mentioned, but it's an important one. In addition to that, we do work a lot with in the side of awareness raising, outreach, public outreach. And I think it's time for all of us to understand that we are threatened by a water crisis, now also an energy crisis for different reasons, but water is affected so much by climate change, as we know, and we surely can do something about it. So we need a behavioral change, and we need that at the level of society. And the best way to start with that is educating young generations, kids at kindergarten level, on how to conserve water, how to conserve energy, and why they should not flush the toilet every time they throw something in it, and things like that, very practical things. And for having this kind of awareness raising, we need to include in our enabling environment, about which we will speak later, also the Ministry of Education. They don't have to know all the technical issues of our sector, but they have to understand that they have a role to play in this. Another level where we work at, and which I would like to point out, is the level of the education system at the higher education system at universities. As we understand, water and energy are very much related. Now, you may put in it also the food aspect and agriculture. So we need to start upgrading our curricula so that we don't teach students separate issues, separate topics. They have to understand the circle of water energy nexus and the circular economies principles. And this is another area that I see, you know, a focus of our work now and in the future. So that's my contribution for now.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. So we had the utility regulators, we had the utility association. So we turn to Georgi Sugar representing a utility. Well, just reflect your thoughts on this development and just follow up what you heard before.
Thank you, Walter. So I think that we can all agree that from the perspective of a water company, we are having an active and a big role in this because we are selling a product. We are selling drinking water. Like Radoslav said in his presentation, the biggest issue for a water company is electricity. Now in Subotica, we now are buying electricity for 75 euro per megawatt. This was last year much cheaper. We had a contract for 52 euros per megawatt. And in this year, we have 2 months, 110 euros per megawatt. So it was rising. Then the government reacted and they put down this price to 75. And of course, this consumption that we are using, the biggest problem in operating issues are now chemicals in our companies, because the chemicals, some of the chemicals have some sort of monopoly on the market. That's bad for the water companies. For example, we have a special situation in the drinking water because there in Subotica we have arsenic in water and we have to remove it. And for that we are more or less using chlorine gas. This gas can be bought in the region in Romania, Hungary, and Slovenia. And the price is rising. So that's the main issue in our company. I think that in short term, what can we do is maybe in wastewater treatment plants, we are producing electricity and we can raise that produced electricity, because now we are producing maybe from 20 to 40% of our demand, but we can raise that maybe to 80 or 100%, and that's the whole situation. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Georgi. And well, we're turning back to the World Bank and a specialist, Gazmetachi, with your statement. Well, you heard also the opinions here. You might reflect to that as well, but what's your statement?
Yeah, thank you very much, Walter, for inviting us in this very important workshop. So, no, this is not new anyway for the bank and for all the customers, that the price of electricity, or especially the price of power, will be increased. But all utilities and especially the services are not yet prepared anyway for that. You know that the crisis has started by the second half of last year, and this comes because of some very important programs let's say in the next future. The bank see the development of energy as a triangle. When the first part also is where the first part is also the climate change. And you know how the big investment will be done, especially to support this decarbonization process. But in the meantime, the bank also support the security of supply, which is quite important point anyway in this discussion. And the third angle of this triangle is affordability. So how affordable the energy will be for the end users, for the customers. And this has been always a problem with many issues and programs that the bank has prepared. I think that Katerina just related a lot of other, let's say, issues regarding this, this actual situation. But in the meantime, I have to add also some other important things anyway regarding that. So you know that affordability is directly connected with this how the power sector can, let's say, approve the prices or can keep the prices maintained, or how these things can be resolved in a different way. Actually, for the bank, there are two, let's say, ways to resolve the issues. Is to manipulate the prices, so to change the prices, to deregulate the prices, or even to manipulate the incomes to the, let's say, to the firms, to the households, especially to let, let's say, the power sector to be developed. And this was something that was a dilemma, that was also always as a kind of strategy. But definitely, what is true is that much better to direct support incomes rather than to distort the prices. This is something that is very important one, because the power sector and the energy sector will give a clear signal to the customers what is the situation related to these prices. So in this context, there are, let's say, many coordination, especially between the energy sector or power sector and the other services, especially water supply for what we are here, to get also the benefit, to get coordination, how to resolve issues. But definitely a big support is, based on the country, of course, that the energy sector goes towards this deregulation process. In the meantime, it's not always recommended the reduction of taxes, except the direct taxes. The direct taxes especially needs to be reviewed in this actual crisis situation. Now, how we can resolve this problem in the next future? Because we are not talking only for this time when we are in this very high crisis and with a very high price shock, but to see what happens in the next future. You see that even in the next future, in the medium term, we don't see any green light about the reduction of the prices for the energy. You see that the power will still stay 100 euros per megawatt hour or up. The gas also will be up. So in this context, we need anyway to get this properly accommodation of that. And what is recommended by the bank, let's say, regarding all that? So the first of all that I said is that we'll keep the prices to give exactly a signal to encourage the, let's say, to encourage the energy efficiency and the low, let's say, intensity. It will be a direct support, and this is very important one, not indirect support to the power sector, but direct support to the companies, to the services, to the household, to the producers, especially to deal and to afford this increase of the prices of energy. And in the meantime, as I just shortly mentioned, that needs to align a short-term stabilization and long-term growth. Otherwise, we cannot achieve, let's say, the target, and to be all prepared for the next price increase. I have also some other recommendations, but probably I can define in the next question that we can just elaborate after. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And well, I'm not pretty sure whether we have enough time for a second round, but definitely you will be available over the day for further discussions. Before I go to Radoslav and Katerina for their reflection, what you have heard and what was part of your presentation, let me just give my observation. And well, Radoslav was saying the situation is quite ironic, and I share this because the acceptance of water losses happened over years. So we were very slowly reacting on situations to invest into infrastructure. Suddenly the prices are rising, and we recognize water losses as one of the reasons why we have this energy rise as well. And suddenly it turns into a burning issue. My observation over time is, are we just shocked in the moment? And then once we are getting used to it, once it's a little bit settled and solutions are provided, will we continue business as usual once we find the solutions? Or do you see really a change of priorities, a change of policy reactions on that? I'll turn this probably first to Radoslav, and for a final word to Katarina Gassner as well. Radoslav.
Thank you, Walter. I think the indicator of whether this is just a short-term issue or not is whether the management teams of water utilities will get a chief energy officer on board or something like that. One observation that I would like to share is that any big water company that I have seen in the region, and when I say big, let's say that's a company that serves more than 150,000 people, plus minus. No matter how bad the overall performance of this utility may be, it will inevitably have a very good and committed laboratory manager, typically a lady, and a potable water treatment plant manager, typically a guy. Think about it. I mean, I'm sure that if you have visited a lot of water companies, the water quality responsible people, the laboratory person and the treatment person are top-notch, irrespective of salaries, irrespective of age, level of qualification, could be hydraulic engineer, could be typically a chemistry or biology graduate, etc. These people are on the spot almost everywhere. We don't have the same situation with energy. And when you go to a water utility and you ask who takes care of energy here, it could be the maintenance person, electrical, mechanical, it could be the SCADA engineer, it could be the control room, if there is a control room manager. But when you talk about energy, it's not only maintenance of pumps, it's not only purchasing of energy, it's not only balancing of the different consumption patterns, it's all of that plus more. So if you go to a water utility in 2 or 3 years, when hopefully the energy prices will have slightly normalized, and you ask the people there to have a chat with their executive team or whatever they call it, and there is an energy guy or girl on board in these 6, 7, 8 people, that would be the sign that it has been taken seriously. And one comparison that we can make is with other sectors, even sectors that are not energy intensive, like for example, telecoms and media. They are starting to have in their exec teams chief energy officer. A very close friend of mine in Bulgaria used to be the chief executive officer of an electricity distribution company. And 1 year ago, he moved to a media company. I was joking with him, what the hell are you doing in a media company? He says, they developed the position of chief energy officer for me. And I said, well, the total energy consumption of this company is less than 5% of the amount of energy that you sold in your previous company. What kind of a challenge is that for you? And he says, it is a challenge, full stop. So long story short, unless the water utility managers get a chief energy officer, or no matter how they call it, on board of their management teams, this will not be resolved in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Radoslav. And now I call Katarina Gassner for her reflection on what have been said on the panel and how this relates to the presentation she was giving at the beginning. We try to shift to her, and I give the word to you, Katarina.
Thank you, Walter. I'll keep it very brief. I think we've heard excellent and very thought-provoking comments already. So what I would like to simply emphasize from what I've heard here is, indeed, this is not a short-term problem. This is something that is going to stay with us over the medium term, at least. And I think the discussion on dedicated resources, which has been framed as energy managers also in water utilities, is an excellent one. I think this is what we should aim for, but I would also like to say that this could also be outsourced. If there is not a dedicated person in each company now, there are by now excellent energy consultant firms, energy service firms that can advise on measures that can be taken. Energy efficiency really is the name of the game. We call energy efficiency the cheapest fuel for a reason. Saving, conserving energy really comes in many forms, and diagnostics of how to do it can be done by outside experts as well. So you don't necessarily need to find somebody and train somebody to do it. Get somebody in who can do it from the outside, and then just use your chief technical person to work with them. There are so many opportunities that we have seen emerge in the recent past, from rooftop solar to solar irrigation, to repurposing of land that has been unused, to wind generation, solar generation. So, and I'm not even talking about the regular energy efficiency, which is the better maintenance and these kind of things. So many opportunities. You don't necessarily need to do it all on your own. There are outside experts. So let me stop with that. Thank you, Walter.
Well, thank you, Katharina. And well, looking at the watch, we seem to run out of time. Well, we just run out of time for this session here. I'm happy that we did answer all the questions, because it's the intention for the first session to set the scene and to leave probably the questions open for further discussions throughout the breaks, or probably in the other sessions. So I think we've been quite successful in delivering statements, describing the situations by the two presenters, as well as we had very interesting contributions from our panelists in really setting the scene for this discussion and the whole day of elaboration which we have amongst us. What I hear is good analysis and the statement of government protections from Katharina Gassner, that the governments are trying to protect the situations for private persons, for private households. We had very interesting contributions from Radoslav, also telling us that the government involves into infrastructure utilities to help them through this situation, but also analyzing it's an unstable situation at the utilities. And if I go to the various contributions here, I heard from the regulators that new objectives need to be set up even throughout their work. There was a clear statement from Elisabetta saying there need to be a focus on the capacity development, and various points were on we need to have a management support, especially in the field of energy efficiency. So is there definitely something in the utilities, according to the organization, to be able to be the spokesman or the responsible person in the management? Well, my question, and I'll leave you with the question, probably if we find some answers, is I heard subsidies are paid from the government. I'm not pretty sure subsidies are paid forever. So we need to react. We need to find solutions. I think that's part of our discussion today. I keep it also as a point, we are still shocked. Yeah, and we try to find solutions, but a gathering like here is intended to find solutions. We need to overcome the shock, but we need to find someone who pays the bill finally. And I think the real shock is that we all think personally at the end, we personally pay the bill of this development. So we will be asked as specialists, as experts, how we dealt with this situation. And I hope that this event here will help to find answers. I conclude with one word: complexity. Radoslav, you said it. It's a complex situation. It's not. We are not pointing out to one institution saying you are going to help us, and we are just following your advice. It's really something where we need, in common, find solutions, and well, have to have a teamwork in the water sector, with well-educated people and well-prepared people, as we also provide this kind of services within IWD. We are ending this session. My thanks goes to the two presenters, Katerina and Radoslav, also to the panelists. Time was short, but you will be addressed from the audience in the breaks as well. And well, change a little bit to easier exercise at the moment, we invite you for the group photo. So for the group photo, please use this door. You will be guided to the spot outside where we'll take a group photo. It's always important, because at the end you will just look at the photos and I was there, and you can show it around. So, and we use it over years. You see it in our brochures. So be sure you be on the photo and you have a documentation that you participate.